Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are providing a webinar on digital accessibility core concepts. I'm going to give it about one more minute, let people join, and we are recording this training today, and we will publish it on our Connors YouTube channel once we're able to make the video accessible. And then we can share that link out to the college. Looks like we still have a couple of people joining. I'll get started here in just a minute. Okay, I'm just going to get started. Again, today's webinar is on digital accessibility core concepts. Our topics today are going to include headings, links, lists, images, color and color contrast tables, audio and video. We won't completely dive into the weeds on all of these topics, but we'll give you a high-level overview of what's required, where you can find additional resources, and how you can get started with those. So the core concepts of digital accessibility do address a majority of the barriers to digital content and technology. And they include the topics I just outlined: headings, links, lists, images, color and color contrast, tables, audio and video. And everything that I cover today is also available online on the WSU Digital Accessibility website. And that URL is wsu.edu/digital-accessibility/core-concepts. So bookmark that webpage. There's a lot of useful information on that site, and we will be continuing to add more information as it's developed. So first, we'll start with headings. Headings provide an outlined structure to your content. They serve as a guide by identifying the topic and subtopics of the information. They also show hierarchy of content, which helps people understand the outline and structure of your content. Headings need to be appropriately formatted as heading styles for headings to be accessible within the digital content and technology that you're using. Assistive technology allows people to navigate to and scan through the content by headings. So on the right of the PowerPoint slide, I have an image that shows a heading 1 page title, hierarchy structure of a heading 1 with a heading 2 below it, with a heading 3 below that, that shows the subtopic areas and how the headings relate to one another. You can find information on headings on the WSU Digital Accessibility website, and that URL is wsu.edu/digital-accessibility/core-concepts/headings. And on that site, you'll find not only more information about headings, more information about what the best practices are, which I'll cover here in a moment, resources, additional links. So there's a lot of additional information available on that website. So the best practices for accessible headings are to use the formatting tools provided. And that really depends on what application you're using. So you want to apply the application formatting tools or the HTML tags for the headings. So for example, if you're using Microsoft Word, you would want to use the built-in heading formatting tools as opposed to manually changing heading sizes and the look of your headings. On a web page, that would mean using the built-in header styles that are already part of the web design system, header 1, 2, 3, as opposed to manually changing the look of your content using span tags or just manually changing the content. So single heading level 1. So each document or web page should only have one main heading. Hierarchical sequence: follow a logical order of headings to outline your content. Try not to skip heading levels, so avoid jumping from a heading level 2 to a heading level 4. There should never be a break in between headings. Descriptive headings, try and make sure you're using short descriptive headings for easy navigation. This not only helps somebody with a screen reader or assistive technology navigate your document or your web page or whatever digital content you're providing. It also, for the web, can help with search engine optimization, and it has additional benefits. Avoid manual styling. So like I just mentioned, for example, if you have a Word document, rather than changing the font style to a different font and upping the size manually, like to 28-point font, avoid doing that. Just use the built-in heading styles. They're all fully customizable. So you can change the way they look and customize them for yourself. Save a template and reuse it for yourself later on. Make sure you remove empty headings. This is important on the web. Next month, we will do a demonstration on testing tools. So we'll show you some different ways that you can look for these different errors on your web page or within a document using the built-in accessibility tools. So we won't get into that today, but you will see some examples in future trainings of what an empty heading might look like. And again, the URL that I provided for all of this information in the previous slide on the digital accessibility website. So next I want to talk about links. Links are another one of our core concepts. It's important to provide clear, concise, and meaningful links because they improve the accessibility and usability of your content. Links should provide a quick and clear understanding of their destination. Descriptive links help users, including those using assistive technology, to understand the link out of context. Lengthy text links, multi-line links, and ambiguous links and some URLs can hinder quick assessment of web content. Concise, meaningful, descriptive, and clearly identifiable links help users quickly understand their purpose and decide whether to select them. And I'll give some examples of what I mean by descriptive. So this I've taken directly off the WSU Digital Accessibility website. So the URL for this content is wsu.edu/digital-accessibility/core-concepts/links. So on the screen, there is a table with 2 columns. The first column has examples of meaningful, concise link text, and the second column has examples of ambiguous or lengthy link text. So it'll give you kind of an idea of this example is taken directly from the WSU website. Let me go back, go forward. So the first example for meaningful, concise link text is the words major and degree programs is hyperlinked to go to the admissions page. That's a meaningful, concise link. It tells you that majors and degree programs is where you're going to go if you click on that link. To the right of that is just the direct URL, which to a screen reader would read out the entire URL, which can influence the user experience. So a screen reader might read out https://admission.wsu.edu/academics/fos/public/index.castle. So as you can see, that is not as good of an experience as simply hyperlinking the text, majors and degree programs. The second example is about Butch Cougar is linked to a page about Butch Cougar. That would be a meaningful, concise link. To the right of that, an ambiguous or lengthy link text example would be hyperlinking the entire sentence. This first Cougar mascot was named Butch in honor of Herbert Butch Meeker of Spokane, who was WSU's football star at the time. So that's way too long and not necessary, and again, can affect the user experience. The third example for meaningful, concise link text is the text "Learn more about WSU" is hyperlinked to point you towards the More About WSU webpage. An ambiguous or lengthy link text example would be hyperlinking the text "More information." If somebody with a screen reader or assistive technology were to pull up an outline of links listed on a page, and they were to get a bunch of links that said, click here, learn more, that's not very descriptive, and they wouldn't have any additional information letting them know where that link might be taking them. Best practices for links. So like we talked about, make sure to use clear and concise links. You want to use concise language for your link text. Avoid lengthy link text. More than a few words is not necessary. Use unique, meaningful link text that describes the destination. You don't want people guessing where the link might be taking them. Avoid being vague link text like we've talked about that says click here, read more. Be consistent and use clarity. You want to use the same link text for the same destination. Avoid using URLs as link text. That rule applies except for perhaps when you are giving a presentation that will only be visible on screen to a viewer. Then you might want to provide the entire URL, as the hyperlinked link text wouldn't tell the user who's only viewing the slide where that link might go. And then reserve text underlining for links only. So this is something we see often, like for example, in a Word document, someone wants to accentuate text, and so they underline it. Try to only reserve underlining for links only, because that's kind of a universal signal for hyperlinks, and it can confuse the user. Accessibility. Alternative text for linked images should describe the link destination. So if you have an image, say for example, on your website and it's linked to another website, the alternative text for that image should describe the linked destination rather than the image itself. But that's another common error that we see, or just a common thing on websites. And then indicate file types in the link. For example, if you're linking to a PDF on your website, you would want to make sure to include PDF within the link. That signals to someone with a screen reader that it's a document and that they might need additional software to open that link, or then they can make a decision about whether or not they want to download that document by clicking on that link. And I do see we've got some questions in the chat. I'm going to jump to the chat really quick. It looks like, so Alex, thank you, has provided all of the links that I just mentioned to the core concepts, to the headings, and to the links that I've already listed the URLs for. And then Kat has a question: what should the wording around the link be? I am struggling with how to refer to a big button below in my website newsletter text. I mean, it depends on the context. So if you're trying to refer to a section within a page, then you might say refer to the section with the section's name or the header name below. So try and just be descriptive of where you're taking that person to. And this might be something we could talk with more one-on-one as well, Kat, if that's helpful, if you're struggling with that with your newsletter. But it should describe the destination. So if it's within that page, I'm worried about screen readers not understanding if I see please visit below link to apply. Yeah, maybe you and I can talk about that as a separate issue, but I think what you're saying is please visit the below link to apply. So what you can do is just, rather than saying the link below, you can just say, you know, please apply online, and hyperlink the text, apply online. Thank you, Alex. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next slide. More best practices for links. Visual distinction. So ensure links are visually distinguishable from surrounding text. That's usually already applied within a web page or within a document when you hyperlink, but you just definitely want to make sure that there's a distinction. That's where hyperlinking the text usually has an underline and a different color to it. Oops. I'm jumping around slides here. Apologies. Go back a couple. More best practices for links. Okay. So Definitely want to maintain an appropriate color contrast, 4.5 to 1 for link text to background, and we'll get more into color contrast here as I move through this presentation. 3 to 1 for link text to surrounding text, and then underline links if contrast is less than 3 to 1. Typically, with our web design system, all of our links are underlined. It just helps to add that contrast and that visual element needed to show the difference between regular text versus a link. Also, don't use red for like span colors on your website. We see that sometimes where people want to provide emphasis. Red text should be exclusively used for hyperlink text to not confuse the user within the web design system. Hover and focus states, a lot of that is built in within the web design system. Underline text on hover and focus if contrast is 3 to 1. And again, I'll show you some examples of issues with color contrast here as we move through this presentation. Use different background color, outline, or border for hover and focus states. Again, a lot of this is built into, I don't know why I keep jumping ahead on my slides here, is built into the web design system, and you don't often have to necessarily worry about it on your website. Within the Ignite theme, there are some issues, so that might be a separate conversation. Focus indicators, provide a visual focus indicator for links. For example, rectangle around the link, which would be obviously something like a button. Ensure focus indicator has at least a 3 to 1 contrast with adjacent colors. And we'll kind of cover that a little bit later on with the color contrast. So next I'm going to talk about lists. So visual impairment and lists. Visual cues help sighted users understand grouped items. A lot of times assistive technology, for example, a screen reader will identify the number of items in a list, which helps aid in orientation. The importance of proper formatting. Improperly formatted lists can be confusing. For example, if you are using a Word document and you are providing a list of, say, what should be bullet points, instead you're using a dash or a tab as the space, then the reading experience or the screen reader experience for the user might be confusing because they won't necessarily know that a list of items is being presented to them. They might just hear apple, orange, banana, pear, peach without the context that it's an ordered list. So there's 2 types of lists. There's unordered and ordered, numbered or bulleted. You see those often within documents and on websites. Again, use those built-in tools that are provided with whatever application you're using for that content. So best practices for lists, like I just mentioned, use the application's formatting tools to build ordered or unordered lists, and then properly nest lists so that assistive technology can identify the sublists. So this is kind of the example that I just went over. This is a bulleted list with sub-items, apples, and then the types of apples listed below that are Red Delicious and Granny Smith. Pears, and then the types of pears are listed below are Bartlett and Asian. So that is an example of a nested bulleted list. Next, I'm going to jump to images. So the benefits of images is that they add visual interest and they help with orientation, and they provide complementary information, regardless of whether it's on the web or in a document. The same rules apply. Challenges with images are inaccessibility, and they can create barriers if they're not properly identified and described to the user. They may cause people to miss contextual information. This is common with, for example, complex charts or images of graphs where no additional information is provided. Motion in images can adversely affect some viewers, so that's also important to keep in mind. And which I forgot to mention on the previous slide, where you can access information for lists. It's on the same website, wsu.edu/digital-accessibility/core-concepts-concepts/links or /images, depending on which information you would like to reference. So images with text. This is another common thing that we see. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a picture that I took a screenshot of from the Digital Accessibility website. It is a gray sign with a red border that says reserved parking, Cougars only, with a cougar head on it. And so an example for alternative text for this might be quotation, sign with Washington State University logo that reads reserved parking, Cougars only, end quote. So that might be an example of what you would use. The important thing is that you convey whatever text is on that image to the user, so that they have the same experience as a sighted user. So you use plain text instead of images of text unless the text presentation is essential. So for example, logos or traffic signs, the text can't be reproduced with the available technology. If using an image with text is necessary, duplicate all the text as alt text or place visible text near the image. And that's the example that I just provided. So decorative images, this is another common thing that we come across. Decorative images are used for layout or aesthetic, so they don't necessarily convey important information to the user. So they should be content. Okay, sorry, let me go back. They don't convey important content or have a function like links do. So they should be implemented so assistive technology can ignore them, improving the experience for users. For example, oops, I don't know why my screen keeps jumping around here. For example, a divider created using multiple dots, say this was in a Word document, if a screen reader were to come across that, if you were to use that multiple dot, it would read to the user ... which can affect the user experience. Within the different technologies that you're using, there are ways to mark images as decorative so a screen reader can ignore it. So keep that in mind. Alternative text for linked images. So the purpose is to describe the link action, destination, or function, not the image content. So we kind of went over that already, but just to reiterate that if you are linking an image, you need to describe where that linked image is going to, not the image itself. Without alternative text, assistive technology may read the image file name or URL, which is unhelpful. So implementation, you want to make sure to use the application formatting tools or provide adjacent visible text within the link. So we touched on this already, but alternative text for complex images, this can get difficult. And so we are going to provide in April, the third Tuesday in April, our digital accessibility webinar will focus exclusively on alternative text and descriptive alternative text, including that for complex images because there's a lot to it. So we'll just touch on it briefly here, but complex images that you might see in flyers, charts, or of flyers, charts, graphs, diagrams, and maps, they convey a lot of information. So when short alternative text isn't enough, you need to provide a textual substitute elsewhere, whether that's a detailed description or a data table adjacent to the image, or whether or not you need to link to more additional detailed information. That can be on a separate page, linked to or within the image. So always include alternative text for complex images, describing them generally or indicating the link destination. And as I'm sure some of you can imagine, that can get really complicated and complex as you're trying to describe more complex images. So the best practices for accessible images are making sure you want to try and keep your alternative text under 150 characters with proper punctuation. That's not always going to be easy. For example, if you're trying to describe a complex image, that's where that additional web page or that additional table of information might be necessary to complement that image. Make alt text meaningful in the context. Ensure the content is understandable without images. Duplicate all meaningful text in images as alt text. Describe complex images in detail. Use captions for oops. I don't know why I keep jumping forward here. Use captions for universally important information, for example, copyright. Avoid starting alt text with image of or photo of. That's something I see often as well, even with decorative images. So recently I saw someone put decorative image of as their description of their decorative image. And if it's decorative, that's not necessary because it's a decorative image. So you can have empty quotation marks within the alt text and a screen reader will ignore that image. Therefore, you don't have to say that it's a descriptive image. Also, something to consider is provide a way to pause auto playing images or videos if you have a video background or a slider with images. Providing a way for the user to pause is important for accessibility. So, okay, we already talked about that. Skipping forward to color and color contrast. So we're not going to get into how to test for this, but we will next month next month we'll cover a number of different testing tools that you can use, including the Wave tool. We'll give a demonstration of a screen reader. We'll show you some of the built-in tools that are available within Adobe Acrobat and Microsoft. We'll kind of cover the different ways that you can test some of your digital content. So color and color contrast. Perception of color varies, obviously, due to visual abilities, color blindness, low vision, and lighting conditions. It can be affected by technology used, for example, different types of monitors or screens. Challenges are the essential information conveyed through color can be inaccessible to those who can't see or differentiate colors. So it's important to not use color alone in order to convey meaning. There should always be another additional way to convey meaning in addition to just using color as a determinant. Color and color contrast. So color determined by hue, saturation, and brightness. Contrast is the ratio of brightness between the foreground and the background. So high contrast would be dark versus light. And I'll show you an example on the next slide of what would be considered high contrast versus low contrast. And the impact is insufficient contrast in digital content can hinder the viewing experience or the user experience. So color and color contrast on the screen, I have a table with some examples of sufficient and insufficient text and background color contrast examples. So there's 2 rows and 4 columns. In the first column, it's sufficient contrast. 1 is a black text on a white background. That's always going to be sufficient. And if you can see the slide, then you can see that it's pretty clear that the black text on a white background is sufficient. And on the contrary, a black background with white text is also sufficient. That's the sufficient contrast number 2 example in the second column. Third column, insufficient contrast number 1 example is light gray text on a white background. I can see this, but I have pretty good vision. So somebody with maybe visual impairment is not going to be able to see that, or they might have to squint or, zoom in, but it might be more challenging for people with visual impairments to be able to see that contrast. And then the fourth example and the second example of insufficient contrast is dark gray text on a black background. So also really hard to read. So there are ways that you can check the color contrast depending on what application you're using. And again, we won't get into that today. We'll get into that next month. But if you're a sighted user, if it's at all difficult for you to use, then you're going to want to make sure that you change the contrast so that it's readable. So best practices for color and color contrast. Text and background ensure sufficient contrast between the foreground and the text background, as we've already talked about. Make sure you're meeting the WCAG 2.1 level AA contrast ratio requirements, which are normal text, which is 12-point font, is 4.5 to 1 should be the ratio. Large text, 18-point or 14-point bold should be 3 to 1 ratio. Linked text, you want to ensure that link color contrasts with the background and surrounding text. Link to background, 4.5 to 1. And again, this is all available on the digital accessibility website. I don't expect you to remember all of this. So you'll want to reference that later if you have questions. And then link to surrounding text is 3:1. Non-text components, you want to ensure components like buttons and focus outlines have at least a 3:1 contrast with adjacent colors and default states. So more best practices for color and contrast. Text on images, you want to use sufficient contrast to make text readable and distinguishable from the image background. Charts and graphs, ensure adjacent color fields have sufficient contrast for each comparison. And then some of the exceptions, or one of the exceptions, contrast requirements do not apply. Whoop. I don't know what's happening. Contrast requirements do not apply to text in logos or for purely aesthetic purposes. So another core concept is tables, which again, we could probably spend an entire hour on just focusing on tables. They can get complex. So this is more of a high level overview. The types of tables we'll cover and show, and I'll tell you a couple of examples of what would and would not be acceptable. So accessible tables are essential for comparing data and should not be used for layout purposes. Properly identifying table headers and providing summaries enhances accessibility and usability, especially for those using assistive technology. So there are some different types of tables. One is a data table, which is used to compare information. Properly formatted headers should be used to help users navigate and understand the data relationships. Assistive technologies read out headers to convey cell content. So that's why it's important. Simple data tables can be used where there's one header row or column and no merged or split cells. It's easier for assistive technology to navigate and you'll have fewer accessibility issues. So, you know, we often run into some very complex tables within publications or within, you know, research results, and they definitely pose a challenge. It's difficult to make them accessible to users who might use accessible technology. So we won't dive all the way into the weeds of that today, but just know it's much easier to make a simple data table accessible. Complex data tables are, gosh, sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that. Complex data tables are multiple header rows, merged or split cells, very challenging to make those accessible. They're harder to understand the relationships between the header and the content within the cells. And so it can provide a really confusing experience for somebody using assistive technology. They more than likely will not be able to follow the data that's in the table if it's a complex data table. And it'll also cause more accessibility issues when converting into different formats. Layout tables are often tables that people use just to control the layout and design of their content. This is discouraged for accessibility. Other tools should be used for visual alignment, not for data comparison. It's harder for assistive technology to navigate problematic tables that are used for layout on smaller screens. So that's another reason it causes a barrier. So best practices for accessible tables, just to go over again, is to use tables to compare data. Make sure you're using table headers for formatting tools or HTML tags. There are built-in table tools within Word and other Microsoft programs like Excel. Also, there are available plugins to use if you're using the web design system. TablePress is an accessible table builder within TablePress if it's a simple table. And so making sure to use those built-in tools will help you to make sure your tables are accessible. Prefer simple tables, one header row column over complex ones. Avoid empty header cells. Use zero or no value or not applicable or similar text rather than an empty cell to provide that content within that cell. And then provide a unique caption or title description for each table that you use, depending on, you know, what application you're using to build that table. So audio and video, again, there's a lot to this. We're currently about to publish an entire audio and video section on the new digital accessibility website. That'll be available soon. But for now, you can bookmark wsu.edu/digital-accessibility/core-concepts/audio-video. And we'll be adding more information to that soon. So the importance of transcripts and captions. This has come up quite a bit lately. We have a lot of faculty and people who have recorded videos or trainings and posted them on YouTube or provided them online on some other third-party service. And people have a lot of questions about this. So it's important to know what the requirements are for transcripts and captions. They matter because they're used in web pages, presentations, social media, online courses, and they need an alternative in order to be accessible to everyone. So there's different types of media. There's audio only, like a podcast or radio program. Those need to have transcripts available to users who may not be able to hear the audio. Video with audio is another example, or just video only is also another example. Audio and video accessibility needs. So transcripts are needed for all audio only content. There's no exceptions for that. It has to be, the link needs to be close to where the audio content is accessible to be played. Captions are needed for videos with audio, and not just auto sync captions that are available within Vimeo or YouTube. The captions have to be updated to be grammatically correct with proper punctuation. So the auto sync functionality is not sufficient. Audio descriptions are needed for visual content that's not explained by the video. So if there are scene changes, or if someone's name appears on the screen, but they're not verbally introduced, then that needs to occur within the audio description or closed captioning of the video. And then all of the controls for the media player. So for example, if it's a YouTube embed on a website, all of the media control, or all of the controls for that media player need to be accessible using a keyboard. Audio and video best practices. So transcripts provide audio only content. They identify speaker changes. They ensure verbatim accuracy and correct sequence. They match the spoken language. They include alongside the audio content, and they consider as a supplement to captioned videos. And captions provide pre-recorded and live videos with audio. You need to identify speaker changes. It needs to be synchronized with audio content, match the spoken language, and ensure verbatim accuracy and correct sequence. So audio descriptions, this is one of the things that's come up a lot lately with a lot of our videos, where if the closed captions are updated to the content that's in the video, but there's no audio description provided, then it wouldn't technically pass the requirement. So for all pre-recorded videos, this can be done in the planning process, where you're separately planning what you're providing pre-recorded videos with visual only information that can be spoken to the user or added as a separate file. It needs to be inserted between spoken dialogue or as a separate file. It's harder to modify videos in natural pauses that have already been done to include the audio description, but it is possible. It would have to be reviewed to determine whether or not that was a possibility. But typically it occurs during the natural pauses of the video, the audio description does. And then whatever media player you use, which I believe Vimeo and YouTube have a good media player that's easily accessible to users using assistive technology when you embed them into a website. But Vimeo does have the ability to upload a separate audio file to the file system to allow the user to toggle back and forth between the audio only file or the regular video file. So I'm sure we have a lot of questions. Those were the core concepts that I wanted to cover. Again, it was more of a high level. These are what they are. refer to the website for more additional information. And I'm going to look at the chat and see what questions we have that maybe have not been answered. It looks like, would it be appropriate if there were two versions of the video were available, one with audio descriptions and one without? Yes, that is one of the success criteria. If you provide the two different options for the video, that is sufficient. The one with and the one without. Yep, that suffices. That is one of the success criteria. No problem. And you can, I'm going to put the link in the chat to what all of the success criteria is for time-based media is what it's called. And that's where all of the requirements and the success criteria are listed on the w3.org website. So it has what the success criteria is for pre-recorded, live, audio only, video only, audio and video. So all of the rules are listed on that website as well. I'm not seeing any other questions that haven't been answered. Angela asked, should alt text include a detailed description of an image's colors? Alex is right. It depends on the context of the image. If the color has meaning in the image, yes. If it's background or decorative, then no. So yes, that is accurate. What other questions do we have?
Sarah, you had in your slideshow to avoid manual editing of headers, like adding bold and italics, but sometimes the way that they are in the thing, they in the page, the format makes the header get lost. So I thought previously you had said that we could manually add a bold or something
Well,
to,
adding bold is not necessarily bad, Linda.
okay,
If you want to emphasize text, you can use bolding or you can use italics to emphasize text. What you don't want to do is bold your entire sentence, because if that
oh
were
yeah,
the case, then it should probably be a header. You're now about to be in the web design system. I think we're currently
right.
finalizing your site right now. And so
Mhm.
within the web design system, you're able to use the built-in heading structure and then change the look of those headers, but not the hierarchy of those headers, if that makes sense. So if you want to make your header 2 smaller, you'll have the option to change the font size of it without changing the fact that it's a header 2. And so we'll provide
Okay.
training on that as you go through it. But I mean, that's a common use case in the past. People have liked the look of a header 3 on the page more
Yeah.
than they liked the look of their header 2. And so that's why they used it. But that
Yeah.
causes an issue for the user. And so they thought about that with the development of the new web design system. It allows, you shouldn't really need to change it, but if the design, requires
Okay.
it, then you'll have the flexibility to do that without changing the structure.
Okay.
And then within something like Microsoft Word, you can pre-format or update the heading, the built-in heading structures to look however you want. And you can refer to the training that we posted on our YouTube channel for how to make Word documents accessible. And I walk you through how to customize your built-in header styles. Then you could save it as a template if you wanted and reuse that document with those built-in header styles.
Okay. And so I'm guessing that it's much better to just or change your style across the whole website rather than on what this page it looks like this and on this page it looks like this.
I think you'll find once you're in the web design system that the built-in styles look really nice and the
Okay.
contrast is sufficient with the size of the headings. Some of the use
Okay.
cases might be if it's supposed to be a header 2 in the right sidebar and you just want it to look a little bit smaller, you could change the font size of that header 2 in the right sidebar just to accommodate for like a longer header. But more than anything, yes, I would stay consistent with what's provided, but there is some flexibility.
Okay.
more than what you're used to with the Ignite theme for sure.
Okay.
What other questions? So really, this is just a place to start. There's a lot to digital accessibility, obviously. As many of you know, a lot of you have been working on this for a while now. The core concepts are really just kind of a starting point to give you an idea of what some of the common issues and barriers are. So once you get comfortable with those core concepts and how they apply to all of the digital content that you create, you'll start to be able to create more accessible content. So obviously headers are not part of like a PowerPoint presentation. That would be more slide titles. So it doesn't apply across the board, but in most cases, most of those concepts will apply to all of the digital content that you create, with some exceptions. So we have about 15 minutes. If anybody has any additional questions.